thank you all for coming, and this is our kickoff program, and we're excited about that. Tonight, we're going to have Dr. Crystal Williams from the Department of, let me make sure I get it right, Higher Education, Leadership, Policy, and Technological Studies. She serves as the assistant professor on the faculty there, and she will moderate tonight's, this evening's program. I also have to add that Crystal and I are from the same hometown, so she also grew up celebrating Juneteenth, and so we're excited to have her here. So, and I just also wanted to show you all that a lot of brains come out of Fort Worth, Texas as well. I wanted to share that as well. But before I turn this program over to Crystal, Dr. Williams, I would like to show, we have a greetings, we have a video from our president of the University of Alabama, and we want to show his greetings, and then I'll turn the program over to Dr. Williams. So thank you, and I'll hopefully join you all during the Q&A session.
Good evening. On behalf of the University of Alabama, it is my privilege to welcome you to tonight's webinar in commemoration of Juneteenth, which celebrates the end of slavery in the United States. I am honored to be a part of UA's Juneteenth observance, and I want to thank our host organization, the UA Black Faculty and Staff Association, and its members for its advocacy and leadership. Juneteenth, which is celebrated annually on June 19th, represents a pivotal moment in our nation's history that deserves recognition and provides an opportunity for reflection. This commemoration serves as a solemn reminder of the harsh realities of slavery, but it also encourages hope by celebrating the bravery and resiliency of African Americans. Juneteenth affords us all the opportunity to study and acknowledge the past while challenging us to work to build a better society and future for all mankind. Again, thank you for your attendance tonight and for your continued support of the important diversity, equity, and inclusion programming at the University of Alabama.
Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to our celebration. Thank you again, Dr. Harris, for the lovely introduction. My name is Crystal L. Williams. I am an assistant professor of higher education here at the University of Alabama and a Texas native, Fort Worth, Texas, to be exact. My family can trace its roots back to Texas for at least 5 generations. So it's definitely an honor for me to be able to serve in this capacity for multiple reasons. I have the lovely honor of introducing our first guest, who is a student leader here at University of Alabama, Marvin E. Adams, who will provide us with a creative expression. And I'm going to give you a little bit of information about Marvin, and then I will turn it over to him. Marvin E. Adams is a communication studies major, minoring in creative media in the College of Communications and Information Sciences. Marvin realized his passion for writing and storytelling at a very young age and was encouraged by his 5th grade teacher to join the Story Tree Company in his hometown of Eutaw, Alabama. His participation in the local community group introduced him to African American writers, and he was inspired by the writing of the prolific poet Langston Hughes. Today, Marvin is completing his senior year here at the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, and in his spare time, he enjoys making a difference in his community. After graduating, he plans to attend the Howard University for graduate school to pursue a master's in social work and a PhD in clinical psychology. His passion is to help others improve their quality of life through his writing, his service to others, his activism, and his educational pursuits. I now present to you, Mr. Marvin E. Adams.
Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. So today I wrote a poem that I titled after the topic for today, Sankofutopia, and it goes as such. In my hindsight, I see lands burned by the flames of oppression, and on this lands are the memory of my ancestors. They were taken from their native homes and boarded on a ship. They brought them through the Middle Passage, and their identities were stripped. Lives were lost along the way. Some died aboard, some jumped the ship. Those that did not make it over, it was cotton or whip. They endured horrific times until finally set free. And then they gave them Jim Crow law and even hung them from their trees. They envisioned better days, better for you, better for me. But instead, I'm screaming, my life matters. I can't breathe, set me free. Today, I'm fighting against a system that was never built for me. And like the collective of my ancestors, I see a greater time, a better future for those after me. And here's what's on my mind. I see a paradise, utopia where Black creatives thrive, technology beyond this world and Black businesses for miles. I see an uplift of my people. Here our culture is alive. Welcome to Sankofutopia. Here we're Black, here we're proud. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Adams. I think
Thank you. Thank you.
these days.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Okay, and now I will introduce our guest lecturer for this evening. We have an esteemed scholar of Afrofuturism, Dr. Reynaldo Anderson. I will give you a brief introduction and then I will turn it over to him, who will be giving a presentation. As he's presenting, I do ask that you take notes of some questions that you may want to ask. We will have an opportunity for Q&A after his presentation. And I don't want you to miss any of those key thoughts. So please take note of that, and you can drop those questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask them in person if you prefer. So Dr. Reynaldo Anderson, a communication studies and Africana studies scholar, currently serves as Associate Professor of Communication Studies at Harris Stowe State University in St. Louis, Missouri. Dr. Anderson is currently the Executive Director and co-founder of the Black Speculative Arts Movement, an international network of artists, intellectuals, creatives, and activists. He is a proud graduate of Jackson State University, where he earned his bachelor's degree, Oklahoma State University, where he earned his master's, and the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where he completed his PhD. Dr. Anderson is the co-editor of a number of anthologies and journals, including Afrofuturism 2.0, The Rise of Astro-Blackness, and When is Wakanda? Afrofuturism and Dark Speculative Futurity. Dr. Anderson is also the author of numerous articles on Africana studies, communication studies, and rhetoric. I present to you, Dr. Reynaldo Anderson.
Thanks for that kind introduction. Okay, let me, okay, can everybody see it?
Yes, sir.
All righty. I'd like to thank Marvin for that kind poem. I was wondering if somebody shared my presentation with him, the way he put all those stanzas together. I can see that he, I see that Dr. Harris and them did their job while he attended the University of Alabama. This title I thought was most apropos today in terms of thinking about what our ancestors, what were they thinking about when they finally found the news they were free? And as some people also know, they were not necessarily the last ones to become free in Texas. As some people know, in Indian territories, some of the so-called civilized nations held enslaved Africans even longer, because, and they suffered some consequences because they fought on the side of the Confederacy. So like John Henry Clark said, for most of our history here, we have had no friends other than ourselves in a lot of circumstances. Okay. Galveston, and what is going on in Texas at that time is Dr. Harris talks about it. This is a couple years after the announcement, and when you see what the Galveston Daily News is talking about, it's talking about, saying slavery is over, but it says the freedmen are advised to remain at their homes and work for wages, and they're not going to be allowed to collect anything at a military post. Now, this is one of the things of those stereotypes about us. I know we were not waiting around for anybody to take care of business at that time, because one of the things, as has been heavily documented, we promptly left. Wherever we were crisscrossing the South looking for family, relatives that had been sold off. I know my own ancestors are out of Mississippi, and we're crisscrossing the South looking for mothers and cousins and brothers and daughters that have been sold off. And then we immediately started building. You know, we built a lot of our colleges, we built a lot of our social institutions, our mutual aid societies, and as some people document, the energy that came in the aftermath of Juneteenth, with regards to literacy, building institutions, we weren't sitting around waiting for people to do something for us. Now, one of the key architects of that vision is a gentleman named Martin Delaney, or what some people, it should be accurately called the father of the Black speculative tradition, which feeds into what we call Afrofuturism. Martin Delaney served in the Union Army. He was a trained scientist and a physician. In 1854, he stays behind in Pittsburgh during a deadly outbreak. And his book, which was a collection of stories at the time, Blake or the Huts of America, is regarded as the first kind of speculative literary tradition in the United States at the time. Delaney was aware of his African ancestry. He knew which tribe that he was descended from in West Africa. And it is said of him, I believe, Frederick Douglass and him worked together briefly, and Frederick Douglass was known for saying, I wake up every day and look in the mirror and say, I thank God I'm a man, but Martin Delaney wakes up and looks in the mirror and says, thank God I'm a Black man. So Martin Delaney was very much proud of his cultural tradition at the time and regarded as the originator or the genesis of a lot of this thinking that we're talking about today. Coming out of Juneteenth, as a lot of people would acknowledge, even in the language that we use, people could argue we became a nation while we were in bondage, in terms of those bonds that were forced on us during the Middle Passage. And one of the things I can confidently say, having traveled to West Africa, the African American was not created over here. The African American was formed in the slave dungeons in West Africa when all those different tribes came together, were captured, standing knee deep in feces and human waste, and then marched out to the ships and surviving that Middle Passage, coming across the Atlantic, surviving suicide or insanity and all kinds of other madness at that time. And these bonds that were forged under that horrific experience and reinforced by a narrative that we were exposed to by another people that were kept in bondage by another group of people for hundreds of years, that helped fuel what was going to happen next after the end of the Civil War, or what we call Juneteenth. This idea of education and mutual aid. Some of our colleges there from the 19th century, building all Black towns. And in the lower right-hand corner, I put down that little symbol there because I know some of us are familiar with it. When the pandemic started last year, we weren't sitting around waiting for Congress to pass a stimulus aid. We created our own stimulus in terms of how we were exchanging money and organizing groups to raise money to take care of things that we couldn't wait for the Congress to do. The idea of Sankofa, when broken down, means return, engage, and bring it here, or go back and get it, okay? And so coming out of Juneteenth, what that represents is us looking back, knowing what we need to go back and get during times of certain type of political activity or economic distress. We learn to look back to our past to go back and get something to bring it forward during times of necessity or during times of creative expression, and we learn how to update it. Sutton Griggs, who's from Texas, was a person who became a Baptist preacher, puts out an important book at the late 19th century that was sold all over the South, Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, called Imperium and Imperio, very much influenced by some of the works, obviously, of Martin Delaney. He's really writing this book talking about the needs to have Black people to have their own stuff, their own nation, their own sense of nationhood to develop. Because as you look at the dates, they're 1870s forward. This is after the end of Reconstruction. And just to the north of Texas, Oklahoma, a lot of people thought was going to be the first Black controlled state here in the United States, but for several reasons that we don't have time to get into that failed. So this envision of having their own type of Black utopia and all Black townships still exists scattered all throughout the South and different parts of even Oklahoma. When you think about Boley, Oklahoma, and some of the Black towns like in Mississippi, Mound Bayou, the generation following Juneteenth coming out of slavery that built Black colleges, built Black towns, built Black banks, fraternal organizations, and mutual aid societies. Pauline Hopkins, the most well-known Black woman writer of her time, widely read, who puts out the book Of One Blood that's talking about exploring this African heritage at the end of the 19th century. You could say is the mother of Black speculative thought in the literary tradition here in the United States. Pauline Hopkins, born before slavery, living until the Great Depression, puts out numerous books at the time, was a contemporary of people like Du Bois and Anna Julia Cooper and others in terms of when you look at the correspondence amongst these intellectuals at the time. I want to play a video for you of what these ideas look like right now that we've been talking about the last few minutes before we go on, so you can see what it looks like now and how it's now being dealt with and now coming out over 100 years later in Carnegie Hall, New York City.
Ready, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Afrofuturism is the cultural movement that intersects music, visual art, literature, politics, science fiction, and of course, technology.
There's a way of seeing Black people thriving and surviving in the future context and being the masters of technology rather than being the tools.
It is the high culture of the African diaspora and how people of African descent operate with agency.
What if, in fact, we thought of the experience of African Americans as not just rigidly historical and connected to slave ships and pyramids, etc.? What if we also added the metaphor of space travel, the metaphors of technology and robotics? Not only would that revise how we remember race, but also it would give us a vision of the future in which Black people played a central and significant part.
How do you know I'm real?
Yes.
I'm not real, I'm just like you.
I guess the very first person I think of for Afrofuturist music, of course, is Sun Ra, because he, was a man from the South, from the Jim Crow South. And he actively remade himself into this wonderful astral being, right?
He is, in one sense, wearing the symbols of the Egyptian god Ra, but he's also articulating himself as being an alien, saying that he's technically from Saturn.
I am Sun Ra, ambassador from the intergalactic regions of the Council of Outer Space.
He was trying to explain why he had this sense of otherness on this particular planet. And yet simultaneously.
I'm going to stop right there and go to my next screen here. Let me get out of that. All right. So it gives you an overview of that. Now, in terms of what is Afrofuturism or what is...
I think that he was, Dr. Anderson, I think he was telling you to go to your next screen so we could see the video. We couldn't see the video.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll see if we can revisit that, the video towards the end then.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. What is Afrofuturism, or what is more properly called the Black speculative tradition? Early 90s, this is a period in history where some of us that were in college at the time were influenced by people like Bell Hooks, Molefi Asante, Cornel West, and others towards the end of the Cold War. And during this time, Mark Derry, who lives in New York City at the time, sees hip hop artists, was familiar with the works of Basquiat and others, and lived and was staying in Manhattan at the time. And he convened a meeting with people like Trisha Rose, Greg Tate, Sam Delaney, to talk about what this phenomenon that he was observing at the time. And it comes up with this term or word called Afrofuturism in dialogue with these three other intellectuals that deal with African-American signification and appropriates images of technology for a future, calling it Afrofuturism. There were problems of it at the time in terms of people thinking of it dealt too much in imaginary spaces, didn't have so much of knowledge of Africa and its traditions at the time, a lot of kind of geographical parochialism because it tended not to include other Africans in the diaspora at that time or from the continent that were making contributions to it, and also a somewhat Eurocentric perspective when Mark conceived of it. However, we now recognize it as a part of what we call Africology, or the transgenerational study of African people, where back during the Civil Rights Movement, when you get the emergence of the modern information society, the foundation of Black Studies by Nathan here at San Francisco State, the appearance of Molefi Akiti Asante's work, all of these strands come together, the technology, the social movements, and Black scholarship come together that influence what we would later call Afrofuturism. And I always point back to the work. Please read Dr. Anna Everett's work, The Revolution Will Be Digitized. That is probably one of the 3 or 4 most seminal pieces related to the study of what we call Afrofuturism and is underappreciated in terms of how important it is and has a lot of relevance, especially to communication scholars. Afrofuturism 2.0, which is a concept I developed in the last several years, where I talk about where I use Afrocentricity as a meta theory to explore Afrofuturism, but I'm including analytics, neurosciences with transdisciplinary applications, and as a technocultural Pan-African movement. And I connect it to Africana studies or Africology as where, to me, it rightly belongs. And sometimes I explain to people meta theory is a paradigm that outlines how a theory should be structured. And so when you're talking about Afrocentricity, Afrofuturism, we're dealing with the past, present, and future, and time, place, and perspective are essential components of this discussion around the topic of Afrofuturism. We deal with metaphysics in terms of the meaning of existence, or truth functional aspects of knowledge, origin of the universe, or structure of the universe, which you see in a lot of the work, especially related to Sun Ra. Also aesthetics, which is the most popular one people are aware of when you see the work of people like Janelle Monáe, some of us as kids that watched Parliament Funkadelic, or some of the aesthetics of Earth, Wind, and Fire, and some of the other aesthetics of other hip hop artists. Also now there are people that are using Adinkra as a way of studying physics now. In terms of quantum physics, people are now getting grants and are incorporating Afrofuturism into STEAM projects now in the last several years. Another aspect, social sciences. For example, Alondra Nelson, who started out as a graduate student exploring Afrofuturism, wrote the book, The Social Life of DNA, and is also now, what we talk about her being the first Afrofuturist who's a part of President Biden's science cabinet now. Also the programmatic aspect of it. For example, the community building, or you see, if you go online and you see these people that are putting together these creative innovation labs that are springing up around the country now, whether it's Pierce Freelon's work in North Carolina, the Black Quantum Futurist Collective that's in Philadelphia. There's another Afrofuturist collective think tank that operates out of Iowa, and others that are out of the Bay Area. And that's kind of what we do with the Black speculative art movement in terms of developing programmatics that have traveled around internationally, spreading this work around the world. Also now you're seeing independent Black dominated blockchain initiatives. Recently, for instance, you have the Oduduwa coin in Nigeria, which I believe is worth about 63 cents a coin last time I looked at. So Black people now, the last couple of years, are now getting involved in blockchain. And for those of you that are not familiar with blockchain, if you have Cash App on your phone, you can buy Bitcoin through your Cash App that's on your phone and sell it, transfer it to other people, and so on. Campus Coin, being one of my former students here at Harris Stowe, has developed a Campus Coin blockchain as a way for people at HBCUs to engage in blockchain technology. Challenges going forward. This idea of Moore's Law. During the pandemic, as many of you already know, your phone, you usually have to update every 18 months to 2 years max, unless you're one of them people that'll just keep it plugged in all the time and just say, I'm not getting a new phone for a while. What the pandemic did, was accelerate all of these technological processes in terms of so many of us that were staying at home teaching, getting Uber Eats or stuff delivered to our door, and are technologically acclimated. It moved a lot of production and capital and ideas online, which sped up a lot of processes during that time, even though it not necessarily helped people that were not plugged in to those platforms, but a lot, as some people call it, platform capitalism. Foresight, how do you see where things are going? A lot of us now that are in Afrofuturism are now engaged in working with think tanks, looking at doing scans, looking at the data science that tells us what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. Insight, understand why things are happening. Like now, people are talking about this rise in violence now since that pandemic ended in this country, or it started declining in the last 30 days. And the psychology of people that are coming out of the pandemic that have really been pent up for the last year. And we're seeing this rush of violence coming in the streets as I've been traveling the country since May, when we did had a performance and a conference in New York last month. People were like driving all wildly out in the street, and it occurred to me people hadn't been behind the wheel in about a year. And you see this kind of tenseness with people that are obviously in some form of psychological distress because they haven't been around people in like 12 months to a year and a half. And so this type of tension that permeates the society is creating a lot of problems. And then oversight, looking from above, how things are connected with everything else. In terms of, now we see the former president in this country who was lied about losing the election. Now you have the leader in Israel pretty much adopting the same tactic, saying that it's fraud and whatever, and that he should still be leading the country. And you're seeing this rise in fascism around the world and certain multiracial democracies where they want to continue some aspect of white minority rule. Challenges for the future of African people. We're talking about pursuing our freedom. This concept of the singularity, the introduction of intelligence amplifiers over the next several years. Nanotechnology, as a talk I gave recently, some of the things that we are fighting about now are irrelevant in terms of some of the broader structural processes that are going to impact our higher education or in our economics over the next couple of years. We're going to have to know more about nanoethics, bioethics, and a lot of things around enhancement. The idea of networking, the idea of the supernet and the AI, this fusion between human personality and advanced technology. Climate change with environmental crisis and resource depletion. That's what we're seeing driving some of the conflict in Africa now, as the climate change continues to dry out and make parts of Africa inhabitable, large populations moving south, putting pressure on the areas where there's still fertile farmland. And then this idea of white neo-fascism and terrorism that the president recently talked about in his speech, which really was kicking off January 6th, and now that seems to be driving public policy with the drive to roll back certain things that we take for granted in terms of the ability to vote in an unencumbered way, or as now we're talking about recently in New York, where the mistake that the political right or the calculation that they are making now is that they can have what will resemble an apartheid government where the majority of the citizens in this country can be ruled by a minority of the citizens of this country through redistricting and restricting the right to vote and making it harder for people of color, Black and brown people, to exercise the right and privilege to vote, which is going to cause a lot more conflict. And that will be decided over the next 2 elections in terms of what the reaction will be. And if that social contract that has been in place since the passage of the Civil Rights Act in the mid-1960s, then to a certain extent, they're going to demonstrate that Malcolm X was correct and Martin Luther King was wrong in terms of what to expect from the people of this country when it came to the rights of African Americans, other citizens, to participate in the democracy. Now, let's see if I can go back to that video. And you all can see why this is, okay, I'll click on it. And I think I need to do something else to,
I think you may need to share a separate screen.
Dr. Anderson, we actually have it queued up for you if you want to exit.
Pardon?
We have it queued up for you if you want to exit your sharing.
Oh, okay then. Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right. Okay, you can play it.
Afrofuturism. Ready, 1, 2, 3, 4. Afrofuturism is the cultural movement that intersects music, visual art, literature, politics, science fiction, and of course, technology.
There's a way of seeing Black people thriving and surviving in a future context and being the masters of technology rather than being the tools.
It is the high culture of the African diaspora and how people of African descent operate with agency.
What if, in fact, we thought of the experience of African Americans as not just rigidly historical and connected to slave ships and pyramids, etc.? What if we also added the metaphor of space travel, the metaphors of technology and robotics? Not only would that revise how we remember race, but also it would give us a vision of the future in which Black people played a central and significant part.
How do you know I'm real?
Yeah.
I'm not real. I'm just like you.
I guess the very first person I think of for Afrofuturist music, of course, is Sun Ra, because he, was a man from the South, from the Jim Crow South. And he actively remade himself into this wonderful astro being, right?
He is, in one sense, wearing the symbols of the Egyptian god Ra, but he's also articulating himself as being an alien, saying that he's technically from Saturn.
I am Sun Ra, ambassador from the intergalactic regions of the Council of Outer Space.
He was trying to explain why he had this sense of otherness on this particular planet. And yet simultaneously, he felt this almost spiritual connection to really helping and transforming the earth.
You don't exist in this society. If you did, your people wouldn't be seeking equal rights. You're not real. If you were, you'd have some status among the nations of the world. So we're both myths. I do not come to you as a reality. I come to you as the myth.
We have to admit that there is this kind of burden of historical consciousness that people of color, particularly Black people, carry, right? Whether it's the histories of trauma, the histories of white supremacy, the current realities of violence and white supremacy. And so Afrofuturism allows a revising of that historical burden, but in a way that's more accessible, creative, and innovative, as younger people want to transform how we see Black people, how we see Black possibilities.
It's defining history for ourselves or recontextualizing what happened in the past. Your imagination is either in the service of your own interest or somebody else's. I'm a big fan of Stacey Robinson as a visual artist. He said, you have to be able to show people the future before you explain it to them sometimes. And so through his art, he visually demonstrates what this possible future might look like.
The cultural shift is happening, and that is an amalgamation of Afrofuturist ideas coming to fruition.
The Jordan Peele's Get Out, which opened up a whole lot of doors for people to have these conversations in art
Black Panther really brought this vision and this ideology into the forefront, Lovecraft country. If you want to know visually what Afrofuturism represents, watch that show.
Definitely Janelle Monáe. She kind of does a remix of what Sun Ra did.
It shifted the consciousness on how Blackness is viewed in society.
When I found out that Carnegie Hall was interested in doing a citywide festival on Afrofuturism, I was so excited. What was once on the outskirts of society is now so fascinating, so intriguing, and so powerful that it has reached the mainstream of society.
This is Carnegie Hall getting ahead of the game. Afrofuturism is still undefined, meaning it's still quite energetic and quite powerful.
Audiences should look forward to being transformed. They should look forward to feeling both a deeper sense of self and a sense of being connected to a larger universe.
It's going to be a constellation of ideas and concepts, not only for music, but art, education, philosophy, and literature.
It's not about legitimizing, it's about collaboration, this unification of cultures, man. You know, it's going to take Carnegie Hall into a whole different place. So this cultural exchange that's about to happen, it's really magical, man. It's a powerful time. It's a powerful time.
All right. Hey, I guess we're ready for a Q&A.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Dr. Anderson. This was a very informative and interesting presentation. Again, I invite everyone to think of some really engaging questions. You can feel free to drop them in the chat. I will be monitoring that. Or if you want to just ask in person, you can unmute yourself and ask, but I will go ahead and kick us off as you all are brainstorming. So I'm going to start off with a very basic question because this is a new topical area for me. I am familiar with the days of Parliament and P-Funk and Janelle Monáe and the likes today, but I never really knew that that was related to Afrofuturism because I didn't really know what Afrofuturism was. So if you had to explain it to my 90-year-old grandmother, what would you say is Afrofuturism? And how would you say your 2.0 version expands upon or pivots from or builds upon the 1.0 version?
Okay, I would just tell her, let me see, you say your 90-year-old grandmother. Okay.
Yes.
All right, I'd say grandmama. That's
and I hope that she doesn't know I tell everybody her age, by the way. So that's between.
I would just say, I'd be like, all right, I would tell my grandmama, I say, grandmama, I done hooked up Hoodoo and Haints to the internet, okay? And she would understand what I was talking about. I took Hoodoo, Haints, and those herbs that you like using and mixing in those little cocktails or whatever. And we hooking it up to the internet and some technology. And okay, and that's what we talking about. And she probably like, all right, that sounds crazy, but you know, that'd probably be the way she react to it. But the thing is with the 2.0 perspective, that was in a dialogue I had with Alondra Nelson several years ago at a conference at Emory that they were hosting at the time. And it was during that exchange that something I had written in my notes, but I shared with the public then at the meeting at Emory that it was the 2.0 era simply because of the advent of social media in 2005, where you get Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, where we move beyond the 1.0 era of the internet and that kind of dimension that had operated from 1995 to 2004. We just said we periodized the 2.0 era with the advent of social media, the creation of the African Union that incorporates the 6th zone and the African Americans as part of the 6th zone of the African Union, or the diaspora as part of the African Union, which is why I use that Pan-African motif and theme throughout the work, because now we're working and organizing from Cape Town to Cairo to Lagos, Accra, Ghana, the Caribbean, and people have different kind of names like The brothers I work with out of Toronto, Canada, they on some Garveyism stuff. They talk about Rasta futurism. And then down in South Africa, they deal with it with some of the African mysticism from their area. And as they point out, some of these people that talk about juju, they say, no, juju is the West African thing. You know, everybody in Africa has not been exposed to juju. That's West Africa. And then in East Africa, they're doing some other things in terms of how they express it. And also it's primarily an Anglophone or English speaking in the English speaking Black world that practices it, as the French world and the Afro-Brazilians are coming on strong. They want to work with me at the American Consulate in Brazil to do something. And they have a very fierce sister down there named Zaika dos Santos that is just do it all. She does steam, music, everything. When she tracked me down on Instagram and said, and we worked through Google Translator, and she wanted to organize it. She found like 200 people in like 2 days to get it going down there. So she wants to have an event soon as the pandemic is over with. And I told her she better not schedule that during Carnival season because that'll probably be the biggest event we've ever put together in history if she schedules it down there. But we're talking about hooking up down there with the convention down in Sao Paulo, Brazil. But the season is really picking up since New York Live Arts and Bill T. Jones. And as they're saying, we had the first festival in New York City in a year when we did the festival last month in May, and we culminated in Times Square. And the people just poured out. I mean, if you've ever been in New York and you see how close everything is on each other, it was kind of terrifying to be all of a sudden around 20,000 people. And the pandemic's still going on. But when they heard that we were doing this festival and Saul Williams, who was one of the performers, he did his motherboard suite as part of our festival perform, people just came out everywhere showing up in cosplay outfits also to participate in the festival of this 2.0 perspective that we're talking about.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I will share that definition with my grandmother and get back to you on her understanding. My second question, I think it's always interesting to know a scholar's path towards their research agenda, because I think that background contextual information helps you better understand what they bring to the work. So from that vantage point, how did you become interested in this area of work, and what has been your journey to Afrofuturism?
Well, one of the things that I think makes me different from most of my academic peers, one, I have a military background. I was in the Marine Corps, so I kind of look at my peers as a little bit more soft-spoken or a little bit more meek than I would in terms of certain things I know I will not accept in terms of how to be treated. So I'd say I bring a certain kind of mentality towards my work. I don't let lack of resources or white supremacy be a barrier for me getting my task done. As you've all seen enough Marine movies, we don't care if we outnumber, we're gonna find a way to win. And I think the other thing, the example was my father, who was in the Air Force. He introduced me as a small kid in the 70s, as a kid, to because he was also in military intelligence. He introduced and my mother too. I was reading comic books. You know, my first heroes were Black Panther, Luke Cage, Iron Man, and Falcon. So this younger generation talk about changing who they are. I'm sorry, those are always going to be 3 Black men to me. So I don't care what people are talking about now. Those were my first 3 heroes, other than my father, in terms of how to see myself speculate. The other thing I was introduced to was this game. Some of the younger people might not have ever heard of Atari. It was this game, Atari, called Pong, you know, where you hooked it up to the TV and it's like you were playing that. And he gave me a chemistry set, and I was trying to figure out how to blow some stuff up, but I didn't realize until a little later that the chemicals weren't strong enough to cause an explosion. And so, what was it? So comic books, also skateboards, and also at the time, other than comic books, I was kind of cross-indexing my comic book stuff because I was moving around military bases. By middle school, I had read The Hobbit, but then I was also reading the Odyssey and the Iliad. and the works of Thucydides, who was a military historian, and the works of Marcus Aurelius. So my thing is, how do Black people use technology, culture, and all that to be in charge, not to get along and be accepted by other people? So as a person growing and plus being sent to Jackson State, I'm comfortable seeing Black people in charge. So for me, Afrofuturism is about, okay, if I use Sankofa to look back, I'm looking back at our history. So I just look at it over the long, broad swath of history. Yeah, we've had a couple of bad, 100 years. So how do we recover from that and get back to where we're supposed to be? Because that's what every other culture is doing. China looks at it, okay, we've been out of the business of being the world's #1 economy for 200 or 300 years, but for most of human history, China had the world's biggest economy. And that's why they're doing what they're doing. Until recent times, white people were poor for most of the history of world history. And that's why these other cultures, whether you're dealing with Chinese futurity or the Indians and so forth, they're looking to their past to be like, okay, this is how we innovated through this period of history. Now, how do we bring the best of those ideas and then match it up with technology? And we need to do the same thing. And so I've just, that's where I would say those elements to come together, that the military, comic books, being around innovative people most of my life are how I became an Afrofuturist.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for that perspective. Thank you again to everyone who is sending questions to the chat. I encourage people to continue with that process. I'm going to ask one more question and then I'll open it up to the group. In this current space where we're celebrating Juneteenth, why do you think that it's important that we revisit the subject of Afrofuturism as we begin this celebration of Juneteenth that we're embarking upon right now?
Because I would look at it, see, the thing is, those people on Juneteenth, the people who are our ancestors that survived that, what they did next, they had to be incredibly resilient. They weren't sitting around having, necessarily unimportant arguments. They're thinking about, okay, how do I build a home? How do I build a house? How do I build a school? How do we build civic society? And they obviously had an idea of how to do that because they rapidly did that in one generation, building a competitive civic society and that's why they had to put Jim Crow on us. So obviously we were intelligent enough to have a modern civic society at the time. And even though an example of that, it has some negative attributes to it, people keep forgetting that it was the descendants of enslaved Africans over here that founded the nation of Liberia. So in the absence of white supremacy, we are perfectly capable of founding a nation on our own, okay, if given the opportunity. And basically, if we weren't hamstrung by mediocre white people all the time, and we could just be great, and then work with some people that had some common sense, we'd be perfectly fine, instead of having to constantly divide our energy to defending ourselves from craziness and then trying to thrive in spite of that.
Awesome. Some very, very powerful remarks there. We have a really great question from Dr. Harris. And she says, a lot of Afrofuturism seems a long way from the basic everyday realities of Black people's lives. What would you say are the practical applications of this concept?
I would say a lot of the application, there are people that are doing the practical application of it, but it comes down to how it's reported. First of all, a lot of the people who report and write stories about it, I consider fundamentally unserious. They don't know that much about Black history or social science. And so they like reporting the kind of entertainment kind of stuff. So they won't look at the work of, say, a Natrice Gaskins, who's a data scientist, who's looking at how to use AI and in terms of what that looks like in maker spaces and in 3D printing. Or they don't talk with people who are now looking at Afrofuturism in relation to engineering and architecture because it's not sexy. They just want to look at the stuff around music and fashion because that's easy to talk about. It's eye-catching, whatever, but there are a lot of people, like for instance, and I talked when I was engaged with some scholars in Africa, I've talked about Afrofuturism and military strategy, for example. it would be cheaper for an African country to develop an effective cyber warfare defense rather than wasting money on nuclear weapons, because we recently saw how cyber attack can disable an entire infrastructure at a company or an oil pipeline. So therefore, it'd be more cost effective for an African country like South Africa to spend and develop a cyber war wing of its military to defend itself from hackers or some other or from other kind of terrorists rather than that. But see, that's not exciting and entertaining for most people to talk about, but that's being discussed. So yeah, it is out there and it does have practical applications. And I did mention the blockchain initiative.
On a related note, if I heard you correctly, it almost sounds like there's certain people who are rooted in this work who aren't necessarily getting the same platform to talk about their contributions as maybe some other scholars. Is that correct? Or did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
And why do you think that is? I'm just curious.
Well, put it this way, it's more entertaining to talk about someone who talks about fashion because, you know, I'm not going to be on CNN and like some of the other people showing their teeth all the time, talking about how much they love the Democratic Party and some other things. I'm going to talk about what Black people need to do to win and be successful in the future. And sometimes it means you might have someone your ally one day and somebody you'll reconsider your allyship in 2 or 3 years. So we're very much programmed still. There's no independent Black media. Growing up, you still had Black radio stations. Now we have to look at mediocre people giving us kind of, you know, stuff on mainstream news that's keeping us ignorant. We hear more about Palestine than how the Nigerians are killing each other in Nigeria now. Okay, I mean, right now, the Northerners of Nigeria are starting to move into butcher the Igbo people and some of the Yorubas, and that's the largest, most populous Black nation in the world, and you can't hardly get any news on it on mainstream media. But let something go down in some podunk country like Slovenia. If 10 people fall off a bridge over there, you'll hear that for 72-hour news cycle, rather than 100 people got kidnapped over near Kaduna or someplace, or Owari over in Igbo land in Nigeria, because the news, the people who are in charge of the news still do not prioritize our interests. And no slight on people from East Europe, but our future, as we're part of the 6th zone of the African Union, I want to get more news coming out of Africa than I do out of Eastern Europe or some podunk place in Asia that I've never been to.
All right, thank you for that. Another question from the audience. This one is from Dr. Foster, and she says that she comments on having seen Beyonce's short film, Black is King. Mm-hmm. And she says that she thought it was very aesthetically beautiful and Afrocentric, but never really thought about it as a Afrofuturistic piece. Mm-hmm. And she's wondering if this and Beyonce's larger work is part of that movement.
Now, that's the key thing when we're talking about Black speculative production. There was some controversy behind Black is King because some of the Africans were like, well, you know, they lift out this part and that part. But I was like, well, none of the people that were employed by Beyonce were complaining about the paycheck they were receiving from Beyonce. And so what you're seeing now, because this has gotten so big now, especially the last 2 years, what you have is particularly European scholars and media, whether it's in Europe or South Africa, trying to pit Africans versus African Americans. And what I mean is, the point is they know they can't stick a white academician or somebody out there to shoot down what they're doing. So they'll go and give somebody, I don't know, a few dollars, a pot of beans or something to put on their resume to try and knock down what we're doing, even though they know nothing about Afrofuturism or whatever. It'll be somebody that they'll say won an award writing a poem or something, and they haven't done even the modicum or a limited amount of research. And so I know in private that's been recently addressed, but as I explained when I was in Africa, because I told the Africans to their face when they were talking about it, I said, look, now, if you're saying Afrofuturism is not for Africa, I want to take back hip hop, jazz, and all this other stuff that you do over here back to America with me, okay? And we've all said that geographically, Afrofuturism is going to look like, depending on where you do it in the world, it's going to look different linguistically. It's going to look like, depending on the tradition you are. in. But what is happening now, part of the movement is we're bringing back independent Black presses like Milton Davis's MV Media. So we've built a network where we can self-publish, distribute it to thousands of people across multiple platforms. And even a lot of my early work, I mean, they weren't going to publish Afrofuturism in some communication journal several years ago. And as I was talking with Malefi Asante, I mean, a lot of his early work, that couldn't get in a university journal. So we were inspired by our parents' earlier generation, where at Motown, and they used to have all these self-contained networks, how to produce, how to create, how to mentor people. And that's what the Afrofuturist movement is bringing back. And some people are frustrated in it because all the gatekeepers in Afrofuturism are Black. That means if you're not a part of this network, whether, you know, you saw all 5 co-curators for Carnegie, you know, we all know each other. All the top people, the top scholars in Afrofuturism know each other. And it's kind of like, I told a friend of mine, it's like playing double dutch. You know how it was double dutch. If we don't know, you don't like, we're not gonna let you get in the double dutch game if you come half stepping or you're not prepared to participate. And, you know, and so this is probably the first independent Black intellectual movement recently that is now on the verge of making an impact in so many other areas. And as Lewis said at the end of that video, talking about it, is still picking up steam in relation to a whole bunch of other things in the broader society. And the reason why I do it, I didn't do it to become famous. At our events, the biggest satisfaction I got when we did an event in Toronto, our biggest supporters a lot of times are single Black mothers, because they like coming to our events because they're like, hey, this stuff keeps my kid interested in school and science. And so they're buying all these independent Black art or things that we make and sell at the event that you aren't going to find at Barnes and Noble and those kind of places, because we're making the independent Black comic books. We're making a lot of other books around this space, and it's just growing and growing and growing. And there's no telling where it's going to end. Personally, when I was at the Cannes Film Festival, we had an event, I was approached by a person from a production company in Hollywood that said, hey, Dr. Anderson, would you take $500,000 to sell me the intellectual rights to BSAM? And I said, no. So I understand. I already told people I'm going to be like August Wilson. The intellectual rights for BSAM will be left in Black hands, you know, in the event, whatever. Maybe I'll donate it to UNICEF or something like that. But I'm not going to leave the vision on future visioning of Black people in non-Black hands. That's not going to happen.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Dr. Harris, do we have time for one more question?
Yes, and I have a question.
Go ahead.
Just quick. I really want, you know, a lot of us are academics and we have students here. How can we start to use Afrofuturism in a way that in our work, in our teaching, in our research, in a way, how can we, as somebody basic, very new to this, what are some mechanisms or resources that we should look at? Because I'm thinking about how can I use Afrofuturism to inspire my students that are part of the Southern Poverty Law Center. You know, how we have NAACP on campus. We have all of these different student groups. And I think that there is a disconnect between a lot of faculty and the students, because they are looking at this in a very practical sense. We're not, but they are in terms of their lives. And I want to, I don't want to be behind. I want to catch up with them to make my teaching and mentoring more meaningful.
I would say if I were at Alabama and somebody had some grant money, they need to put together and start an innovation hub with Talladega College. I think, isn't there a Talladega College nearby?
There's Stillman.
Stillman.
Down the street. Stillman.
You start an innovation hub, because right now, if you do the research, most innovation hubs are located in the Northeast around New York, Boston, Washington, DC, or out in the Bay Area or LA. So that is what, and so when you're talking about an innovation hub, a lot of the younger students, they are more technologically sophisticated than most of the people that's trying to teach them now in terms of how you combine anime with digital humanities, also with, what's another thing? Because I know my friend Tanisha Taylor at Texas Southern, she's really good at this stuff. That's why she's just,
well, I teach leadership. I thought I teach leadership. I teach organization,
organizational leadership. I would use Afrofuturism because if you talk about, we are a decentralized entity that can communicate through blockchain technology, or I'm trying to think, what is the alternative to Zoom that some people use that is a much more secure?
Maybe Teams.
I can't think of it right now, but the Caribbean community, when we really want to make sure all our conversations across the Atlantic are secure, we don't even use Zoom.
Is it Cisco?
Oh, I can't recall the name of it at the moment, but it was the Afro-Caribbean community out of Canada that got us hooked onto it. So the thing is,
so you're saying in order to start that, if I just want to do that in my classroom, but I'm saying in order to start that, you're saying that we need to come together collectively as scholars and build upon that. But what could we individually start to think about as we're even approaching our courses in the fall?
Okay, well, since I know you're a person with communications training, I talked about Anna Everett's piece, "The Revolution Will Be Digitized," that she wrote in the 90s. And Anna Everett is out in California. So if we talking about what's happening right now, how they're trying to disenfranchise of the vote, I would say what needs to happen right now over the next couple of semesters is, how do people organize online and mobilize in such a way to protect their rights, okay? And deal with political education and getting the entire community mobilized to participate in the political process and to a certain extent. And so, like for instance, I know during the campaign
how is that connected to Afrofuturism?
Okay, Afrofuturism talks about how Black people use technology. All right. Now, a lot of Black folks, you'd be surprised how they don't know, they don't have that high level of understanding of technology, how to make it work for them. As I had to show some of my friends that had Cash App how to have keep Bitcoin in their Cash App as like a reserve currency. And so the thing is, I would say start out small and then talk to them about what is cryptocurrency, okay? And how is that tied into some of the other stuff that they're seeing on the news? You got to start small, because a lot of things, as a person who also combines activism with what I do, a lot of times our people are only going to do what they see you do, okay? You can teach it to them and you can tell it to them, but unless they see you do it, they're not going to adopt it. So it's got to be part of your everyday practice, whatever it is. And it usually can be something small, like how I learned about technology and got my technology game up was during the Ferguson unrest. When my students were out protesting, I went to protest with them, and I found out this little app called GroupMe, of how we organized around that, and how, as one of the Ferguson protesters, on GroupMe, we could put out a message saying, we're gonna meet over here, and all the police would go over there, and we were actually meeting somewhere else. And that's why we wore the police out, because there weren't enough police. That's why they had the National Guard. They were about to get overwhelmed. And so using a simple app like GroupMe as an organizing device to share communication with my class, that was something back and forth there. You know, so how does technology make their lives in relation to academia more efficient? Because one thing about the pandemic now, everyone knows now, man, you don't want people wasting your time in terms of whether it comes to assignments, getting work done, and some other things. So, so that's the one thing about the pandemic. The lesson I brought from the Ferguson thing was to upgrade my technological apps and see. And apparently, I also found out during the pandemic, the students access another site that they said, well, Dr. Anderson, you know, there's a site where they could get something that looks like really good plagiarized work. And one of the students got mad at the other student for telling me about it, because the students they know how to technologically get around. So that's where, if you're talking about leadership and organization, they will follow your lead if they see you acting on a certain technological level that makes their lives easier, because so many of them are trying to work and go to school at the same time. And if they will.
Okay, so you meant in terms of practice. I was also in terms of how do I teach and engage students around this, theoretical model of Afrofuturism.
I would say, think about this. You remember COM theory? In COM theory, we were all introduced to the ideas of SRAM back in the 50s, what they called information theory. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so then the idea of Moore's law, how people upgrade their phones every 18 months. And then talk about now how Moore's law translates to now you got to update your stuff every 6 or 7 months, or what some people are calling Moore's law plus. You got to adapt to change. So I would deal with that, probably part of my syllabus, where I talk about leadership and adapting to change quickly, in terms of how do I mobilize my intellectual resources and other resources to adapt to a change in my environment through communication technology. Okay, because a lot of faculty around the country, they were not prepared to shift their entire stuff onto Zoom last spring. And you know, a lot of faculty were dealing with depression. We also know that people were dealing with depression while they had their camera screen off at the time, because they didn't want to do the face-to-face instruction. And so we had to berate them, say, man, turn your screen on, man. And so there's a psychological aspect of this. What's the psychology of a person in relation to technology and communication that we discovered during the pandemic? So we've covered psychology, how to mobilize technology in a short amount of time, how do you adapt to technology, and then those are just 3 or 4 new topics. If I talked about leadership in relation to communications right there, that I'd probably introduce into my syllabus this fall.
But thank you for that, because I am going to take this presentation, hopefully come together with some colleagues, or we could just start a group of interest to talk about some of these ideas. I think it would be very beneficial.
And then I would explore, do a Google search on innovation labs, because people keep forgetting back in the 60s, Sun Ra was experimenting as a part of a lab with another guy back in the 60s. This idea of labs started in the 60s. It's not a recent thing. And that's where people would experiment in relation between technology and culture. Like, for instance, when it comes to the idea of gaming, Black kids do different kind of e-games than the white kids. The white kids, they'll have that start with the swords and all the stuff. And Black kids are a totally different culture when it comes to the e-game stuff. Okay. And so esports, which I'm sure Alabama probably already has an esports component somewhere, is you can make more money with esports than you can with some of these football teams. And so the esports student is like the new athlete on campus now. Because, you know, here I ran into a kid won like $1 million here a year and a half ago doing esports, you know, and so that's another aspect of communication, sports and communication.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Harris, for that question. I think that we are just about out of time. So first of all, thank you to our presenter, Dr. Anderson, for your engaging conversation. Thank you to our participants for all of your great questions. Thank you to Dr. Harris and BFSA for putting on this event. It's a kickoff event. I'm going to turn it over to the president of BFSA, President Chad Jackson, so that he can close us out and also tell us about the next part of this celebration.
Well, thank you, Dr. Williams, for doing such an excellent job moderating tonight's program. I do want to thank Dr. Nikita Harris for chairing the BFSA's 2021 Juneteenth observations. She's done an excellent job with both putting this program together and with the media that has surrounded these particular events. I also want to thank Mr. Marvin Adams. Wonderful job on the poetry that you did, sir. You represented us and yourself very well. Great job.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. And Dr. Reynaldo Anderson, awesome presentation. I do believe with all my heart that we will have many to come back and revisit this presentation on our media and through the channels that we have. I do want to acknowledge briefly some of the e-board members that we actually have here. We have our Vice President, Dr. Cassandra Simon, on with us, and I believe there she is. She's joined us tonight, so thank you so much. And we actually have, and I believe I saw her.
Chad.
Yes, ma'am.
May I please interject and ask you to please remind everybody to go to the website and sign the petition. So go ahead, you can take it from there. But I just wanted to make sure you mentioned the petition.
Yes, ma'am. That was after I introduced Monday.
I'm sorry, I just didn't know. I didn't know because we.
No, that's fine. Hey, I didn't
Okay.
tell you. That's cool. That's fine. Thank you all so much. She's right. So let's go ahead and get that out. On the bfsa.ua.edu, Opal Lee, who is an advocate for Juneteenth, has a petition there asking, we ask that you go and sign the petition. She has efforts to make Juneteenth a federal holiday, and she has some activities that are surrounding that petition and Juneteenth events. Please go to bfsa.ua.edu. Facebook is UA BFSA, Instagram is BFSA_UA, and Instagram is UA BFSA. So check us out on all of those platforms.
And forward that petition to everywhere you can on all of your media, social media sites or listservs and everything. Forward that petition to everybody you can, please.
Yes, thank you so kindly. Invite all your people to that website so we can get the numbers up for Opal Lee. On Monday, we asked that you join us. I did see Dr. Cynthia Gooch Grayson kind of jump in for a moment. I think she's still here. She's going to do Juneteenth and genealogy, the exploration of the Black family. We'll meet us again here Monday at the 14th at 6 p.m. And again, thank everyone. You did a fantastic job. I am not surprised. Excellent as always. The minimum for BFSA, and we are most proud to have you. And we look forward to your celebrating Juneteenth. And I will leave it, Dr. Anderson, were you trying to say something?
Let me tell you all one last thing. Do not be slow. For example, I didn't have time to talk about it. Our group now, we're doing something with Afrofuturism and global security next month with a think tank out of the Bay Area. So I would say if you are going to put together an innovation lab, don't be slow. I think you'll have a window of opportunity of about 18 months to make whatever you want to do come together. And that's why I suggested co-sign what Dr. Harris said about Stillman, because the Biden administration has made a commitment to HBCUs. There's a window of opportunity. I know you all know football at Alabama. There's a hole right now and y'all need to run for the touchdown before the hole closes.
Don't worry, Dr. Anderson, I will be calling you tomorrow.
Yes. Okay. And be sure to forward that information. We'll get it on our media sites so we can keep everyone informed and organized.
Okay.
All right. All right. So again, I'm going to put it back over to the chairperson of the Juneteenth observation, Dr. Harris. Thank you so much for having us, and thank you so much for putting a wonderful presentation together. We've had individuals from the UA community and from all over. I had the opportunity to see where Dr. Williams, she has a great reach on Twitter and LinkedIn and just been everywhere. I received all kinds of dings for everyone sharing. Thank you so kindly for doing that. And Dr. Harris, it's back into you.
I just want to thank Marvin, did an excellent job. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. I will be in contact with you as we move forward to pulling together a group here on campus. And thank you very much to our moderator this evening, Dr. Williams. I appreciate you. And everyone, I just want to say, I just ended by saying good night. Good night.
I see BFSA as a caucus, and that means that it's important that people of color who are faculty and staff at the University of Alabama be connected.
It's a great place to get started on campus. So for any new professional, new to campus, whatever that may be, I think it's a place where you'll find a range of experience as far as work experience. There's some new professionals in there, and there's some folks who've been here 30 plus years.
Really, it's a chance to connect with folks who know what it's like to be Black and here at UA.
One of the biggest thing would be the opportunities that it presents. A lot of things that I would not have known about on campus if it wasn't as a result of my membership with BFSA. So just having that connection, having people of like minds, people who care about the same issues as you, and just working with those people, getting the opportunity to learn about events on campus that will be beneficial to you.
All right, I'm Allison Wren. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm a BFSA ambassador. So we act as the liaison between the actual BFSA faculty and staff and then the student body. BFSA is one of the best things that I got myself involved in on campus because, like I said, it's helped me with a lot of my self-confidence. It's helped me to become more involved, to meet more people, to gain more opportunities for mentorship, and to gain more opportunities just to put myself out there and to prepare myself for the real world.
The BFSA Scholars, I think, is the program that I would point to as one of the most beneficial. They're doing some great work helping our students for our scholarships, getting organized, getting plugged into the community.
I've been a supporter of Black scholars, from the beginning and precursors, and currently this year in particular, trying to support the ambassadors both with time and financially. The kind of things we support, speakers, all those things. I think for faculty and staff, making sure that there's just general things to do and things of interest for people to get together around. So those range, but I think all those things are beneficial.
BFSA, because BFSA is family. It really is. It's a means of family here on the University of Alabama campus.
Being in BFSA is about being connected and collaborating to support students of color and to support all students in their success. I'm excited to be a part of the organization.
Yeah, I'd like being able to support the university and do things that help the university grow and develop. And BFSA is just a good outlet for doing those kinds of things.